This video is a multi-part series covering my detailed review of the new Ford Ranger PHEV or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. I'm going to be covering what the Ranger PHEV is and how hybrids work, weights, range, driving on-road, off-road and towing, onboard power, looking at the PHEV Ranger versus the V6 diesel and versus its existing PHEV competition. So let's start with what is the Ranger PHEV, and that starts with a look at what hybrids are. The first thing to note is ICE, internal combustion engine. That means petrol or diesel. So let's set a baseline. We've got our petrol engine over here, driving through a transfer case gearbox to the back axle, differential, and the same to the front axle. The sole power source is petrol. Then we've got our battery electric vehicle. Again, we've got two axles, differential front and rear, but we just put an electric motor on the back, electric motor on the front, connect them to a battery, and now we have an all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive vehicle. And the sole power source there is the battery. It could drive the front, rear, or wheels. Now, for a hybrid, we've actually got both in play, hence the term hybrid. So we've got our petrol engine over here, but we've got an electric motor as well, in this case on that same drive shaft, kind of like two people cycling on a tandem cycle. And in this case it's a front wheel drive, but we could also make it an all-wheel drive simply by adding an electric motor at the back. There's many different concepts, but the main one is petrol or ICE, and then BEV, battery electric vehicle, and hybrid does both. Okay, now let's take a look at parallel hybrids versus series hybrid. A parallel hybrid is what I showed you before. So both of the petrol engine and electric motor can turn the wheels together, or one can do it just electric or just petrol. Whereas a series hybrid is different. It also has a petrol engine, but it is designed to generate electricity only, and the petrol engine never actually directly powers the front wheel. Examples of that is the Nissan X-Trail e-Power and the BYD Shark, although the BYD Shark can actually drive the front wheels above 70 k's an hour, but really it's a series hybrid. So fundamentally they're both hybrids, but they work fairly differently. Now, both of these vehicles can do something called regen. When you take your foot off the brake or you slow down, you're going down a hill, then the vehicle will slow down and the motor turns from being a motor to a generator, and it will actually charge the battery. So if you're at the top of a big hill and come down it, then you should end up with more battery power at the bottom of the hill than you did at the top of the hill, so energy harvesting. Now there's two more types of hybrid. Normal hybrid, we call that a plugless over here. That typically has quite a small battery, and the thing about that is that you might not be able to get more than about 50 k's an hour speed out of it. It's just really for very slow speed stuff, and it's kind of there to just aid the ICE engine, be that petrol or diesel. It's not really there to power the vehicle independently, and that battery can only be charged by regen or by the ICE engine devoting some energy to powering it. Now we contrast that with a PHEV or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Now it's got a much bigger battery and it can be charged externally, hence the name plug-in. Now typically the range you get pure electric out of that is 30 to 100 kilometers, so much greater. The battery can be charged as per the hybrid but also externally, and you should be able to easily get up to cruise at 100 kilometers an hour. So in other words, it can operate purely in electric mode quite comfortably, as well as using its ICE engine or both together. And so the EV systems are designed to be used in this case without necessarily having assistance from the ICE. So what is the Ranger PHEV? Well, it is a parallel hybrid and it is a plug-in hybrid, both at the same time. And here's a schematic of how it looks. Now what we've got here at the back is the battery. So essentially this is pretty much a standard Ranger architecture, but they've added on the electrics to it. So there's the battery at the back, and the Ford term for using the battery power when you come to a stop is PPOB, Pro Power on Board. We'll look at that in more detail later on. There's an electric motor here with 75 kilowatts of power and 300 Newton meters of torque, and then we've got the ICE engine, which is petrol, 138 kilowatts and 411 Newton meters, and that has been optimized for use in this vehicle, and there's a few changes being made to it. The combined power 207,697, you can't simply add up the combination of those two and get the combined, but that's the combined there, and It does have the all-wheel drive system, so there's a clutch here which will drive the front wheels in a 4A mode as and when required. It's got low range and it's got the 10-speed automatic. Now here you can see in orange the ICE powertrain, that's the petrol engine, and here is in blue is the electric powertrain, and in there is the combined powertrain. Now the vehicle still has a 12-volt battery over here, and if you look in the engine bay it's going to be pretty standard with the addition of this coolant over here, because one of the things modern electric vehicles do is thermally manage the battery to the optimum temperature for charging or for discharging, and that might be heating it or cooling it, and you obviously need a coolant here as well. So that's really the only change underneath the bonnet. Now there's 4 modes you can drive the vehicle in. Auto EV, that will use the petrol engine, the electric motor, and the battery won't be specifically charged, but it will just put back any energy that it uses either through regen, or it will use some of the ICE engine cycles just to keep that battery pretty much where it is. So that is your default mode. That is the best for power, and it is the best for long run efficiency. If you're going to drive hundreds of kilometers, that's what you want to be using, and that's typically what you use most of the time. Then there's EV Now, and EV Now is purely running it in electric mode, so that petrol engine is not used at all, and it's only on the electric, and it's not a very powerful engine, only 75 kilowatts, 300 newton meters. It's not enough, and so my recommendation there is it's for short trips. Well, it's going to be short trips because the range isn't great, we'll get to that in a moment. Level off-road driving, and I'll explain why that is in a moment. Manoeuvring trailers and around the suburbs. What you find in the EV Now mode is when you're driving along at the lights, you put your foot to the floor and the car's moving off okay, it will actually say, hey, do you want to engage the ICE engine for extra power? And you can click OK and that will come in. Same sort of deal for going up hills as well. So it is a bit underpowered in EV mode, but it will work around town. Then we've got EV Later. So this is when you've set your Pro power on board to a specific level, let's say 80% or something like that, and you want to take that power to somewhere, maybe because you're going to run your caravan off it or a welder or whatever the case may be. The vehicle will not let it drop below that level, and I put a plus here because that will actually use more energy than what would normally be the case in auto EV, because the vehicle can't use the battery in quite the way that it would normally be doing so. So that's what you use when you want to sort of take your sort of portable generator somewhere. Then we've got EV Charge, and that's when, let's say, I don't know, you're going somewhere and you've got 20% battery and you want it to get it to 80%, so when you get to that point you can run whatever you want to run, and the engine will actually use extra cycles, extra power cycles, to charge that battery as you're going along. And that's why I've put 2 pluses there, and of course all of this will impact fuel efficiency. Now what I didn't get a chance to do was run tests, controlled tests, to tell you what impact all of this has on fuel efficiency, because there just simply wasn't the time for me to be able to do that. But if I get a chance I will do that and I will report back. Now there are very seamless transitions from electric to ICE. What you find is the only way I could really tell when the ICE engine kicked in was to have the tacho up, and I could look at the tacho and go, oh yeah, we're now doing 1500 RPM. It's really smooth and really quiet. Now an important point here, EV Charge will only go to 90%, and the reason for that, they want to leave 10% available for regen. And similarly, if you charge the vehicle to 100% with off a charging point, and then you can't take that 100% to your job site, it will drop down to 90 and then it will maintain at 90. And I don't think the car ever runs purely on petrol. I think that the 0% isn't. I think that there's area underneath, or a certain amount of capacity under the battery, so it's always got some the ability to run in auto EV even when it's showing 0. That's certainly my impression. Now there's an 8-year 160,000 kilometre warranty on the battery, so all of this, you've got to replace the battery in 1 or 2 years, that is old school thinking for EVs. Just don't listen to those people. I've got a whole blog post where I explain that's simply not the case. Now I want to talk about the fundamental electrification challenge here, because this is important to understand in the context of 4-wheel drives, and it's basically energy density, which is that batteries are really heavy and really bulky and don't have much energy compared to petrol and diesel. And here's a BYD Shark. I'm only using a Shark because I just happen to have a really good diagram of it. Now here is the battery. That's a 30 kilowatt hour battery, and here is the petrol tank. That's a 60 litre petrol tank. This battery will take you 80 to 100 kilometres, and it weighs, by my estimations, around 165 kilograms, whereas this petrol will take you 500 to 600 kilometres, and there'll be 44 kilograms worth of petrol in it, plus the weight of the tank. So you see what I'm talking about here. And for around town cars and Teslas and sedans and stuff like that, this isn't a problem. It's not even a consideration. Once we get into four-wheel drives, off-roading, modifications, the whole thing changes. And that's why electrification is so hard with these vehicles and why they don't have bigger batteries. Okay, now grades. So the Poverty Pack version is the XLT, then we've got the Sport, Wild Track and the Storm Track. This is what it looks like across the range. So we miss out on the XLS and the XL in the PHEV range. It's dual cab only, and I've put pricing up. You can pause that. That pricing will probably change over time, but essentially the PHEVs are more expensive, and we'll take a look at the options for that in a moment. Now we'll talk about wheels and tyres here. That's the XLT, that's the Sport, that's the Wild Track, and that's the Storm Track. A few points here. So these wheels look different, and they are different because they are aerodynamically sculpted. It's one of the ways you can tell a hybrid or an electric vehicle, and it's worth 20 points of drag. What does that mean? Well, the drag coefficient might go, and I'm guessing here, from 0.45 to 0.43, 4 or 5% improvement. That would make a small but measurable difference for range. And when it comes to this sort of stuff, every kilometre counts. So these wheels will give you a bit more range. It would be interesting to put them on another Ranger, if only I had one, to see what difference that would be. Now there's also EV only tyres, which are these, and they will also improve range because they will be specifically designed for low rolling resistance. And there's changes to the underbody aerodynamics to also improve drag. So again, if you here's the point, right? Any modifications are going to start to reduce your range more than they would with a petrol or diesel vehicle. So you change the tyres, you change the wheels, you start putting underbody protection on, which isn't aerodynamically designed, drag goes up, range goes down. And again, that is not a problem your average around town Tesla driver has to deal with, but it is for these vehicles. So let's talk about range and charging then. So I'll compare the two. So the PHEV, that's got a 70 litre petrol tank, so it's a bit smaller than the diesel, so it's off to a bad start. 91 RON, which is good. Let's call it 65 usable. Now I need to estimate its fuel consumption. I'm going to put that at 9 based on my own tests, which weren't as instrumented as I would have liked on the press launch, and 49 kilometres. Now that's off the NED-C cycle, which is the Australian standard, but it is pretty optimistic compared with the newer WLTP. So anyway, put that together and we get, let's say, 770, and those are the official figures. Now when it comes to hybrid vehicles, you can throw away this 2.9. It means nothing, because either that could be 0 because you're pure electric, or if you're in automatic mode it's going to be higher than that. So hybrid ADR fuel consumption figures, they're kind of pointless. Now let's use the same logic for the V6. So 80 litres of diesel, so we're off to a better start already, 75 usable. We do have a figure for that, 8.4, 890 kilometres is what you're going to get. So the PHEV is going to be shorter ranged for sure. Is that going to be a problem for you? Well, that's your call. I'm just giving you the information. Remember, both figures will drop once you start modifying it, but the petrol tends to drop quicker than the diesel once you start loading it up. Now, going further, I do think that there would be space here for a long-range fuel tank, which is certainly what you're going to need once you're towing big, heavy caravans. So hopefully the aftermarket will sort that out. Now, I did do an efficiency test with EV only mode, and that was actually as soon as I got in the car, Ford headquarters over here, and that was our first driver change point over there. So here's what I found. 100% to 0% was 27 kilometres. That's a fair way short of the 49, but a couple of riders there. First of all, I had all-terrain tyres on that vehicle. I did not have the specialised low rolling resistance ones, and I also had a spare tyre, which is actually an option. So I don't think the spare tyre would have made a huge amount of difference, to be honest, but the ATs would have done a bit. Either way, everything I did indicates you're going to really struggle to get to that 49 kilometres, and I think if you're looking at a stock vehicle, 25-30 is probably more realistic. This route, I just drove it keeping up with traffic because there was a fair bit of traffic around. There was some 100 k's an hour, some traffic lights, etc., and there was some hills around here, so it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I wasn't on a racetrack or anything else like that, so I think that's kind of representative, and a 49, optimistic. Now, is it cost effective for you? Well, let's take a look at some numbers. So 25 kilometre trip, and we're going to bring that down, 5 trips per week, that's 6,500 kilometres a year. Diesel, and we're going to compare against the diesel, $2.10, 12 litres per 100. We're going to assume it costs you nothing to charge because you've got a roof full of solar. So extra cost for the hybrid is going to be, let's say, $5,000, 3.1 years to break even. However, that does ignore the fact that you will get a benefit if you're doing a lot of stop-start stuff, even if you're not in pure electric mode. So maybe 2-3 years based on that to break even. It's entirely up to you. Now, we do have the NVES coming in, new vehicle emissions standard. I have a whole video on that. That is absolutely going to hit diesel Rangers. It will hit this one less, and there could even be some hybrids, although the pure EV lobby groups are very much against hybrids. They consider them impure and the work of Satan. So I don't know if we're going to get any more tax breaks for hybrids. We'll just have to see what happens. Now, for charging, plug-in, max charge rate 3.5 kilowatts. What's important is that it takes 7 hours to go from 0 to 100%. So I actually think that's a bit of a problem, because if you want to go and drop the kids off somewhere, you better hope that they're doing something for 7 hours so that you can recharge your vehicle by the time you come back. Now, if you come at 50, and 10 amps, by the way, is just a socket like this in your home. 15 amps, you could get that put in fairly easily, and that drops it to 4 hours, which is still not ideal. There is no DC fast charging, which is normal for a small battery like this. There is on some of its competitors, and you do get that 10 amp charger supplied, which is good. Sometimes you've got to buy them extra. So let's talk about a subject close to the heart of every touring four-wheel drive and tower, and that is weights. Now that starts with talking about spare tyres. Why? Because amazingly, the spare tyre is not standard across the range. So the spare tyre is a no-cost option for all grades except for the top-end Storm Track, and that means you can just say to the dealer, give me a spare tyre please, and they will for no charge. Why doesn't it come standard? To make the payload figures look a bit better is my view. Now, how much does it weigh? Well, I know because I've weighed one myself on my car. The steel rimmed version is 30 kilograms and the alloy is 27. Now, there is an option for all-terrain tyres as well. That, in my estimation, I haven't actually weighed it, will be about 5 kilograms per tyre. And you can also have 17-inch diameter wheels. The tyre diameter remains the same, or 18s. I would recommend always going for the 17s. They're better off-road, lighter, and will actually give you slightly better range, because not only is it lighter, it's actually rotating mass, and that makes a big difference for range as well. So those ATs and 18s will impact your EV range a bit. Now, Ford do a really good job of defining their weight. I do have a whole video where I've gone through this, but the figure that they're quoting is their curb weight, which is the vehicle with a full tank of fuel without occupants, luggage or cargo, and it's the heaviest possible combination of factory fitted equipment. Now let's take a look at what that means across the range. So here are the Ford supplied figures in black, and I've adjusted them to add on the effect of the spare steel. So that's subtracting 30 kilograms from these weights, with the exception of the Storm Track, which already has a spare. So we just leave that as is. Now the interesting thing here is that for the other Ranger grades, Ford actually vary the GVM, the gross vehicle mass, the maximum the vehicle can weigh, to account for the fact that the luxury grades like Platinum and Wildtrak are heavier than the poverty pack grades such as XL and XLS. However, they haven't done that here. All these grades have a GVM of 3,500 kilograms, and I believe that is because as soon as you go above that, the vehicle moves out of what's termed an NA class into an NB1 class, and that is a different set of regulations for emissions and safety, and Ford probably didn't want to do that, so they've kind of kept the GVM at 3,500, and that's why the payload starts to get squeezed as the weight builds up into the more luxury grades with power seats and extra heating and all the rest of it. And as a general matter, the regulations for vehicle weight limits were put in place many years ago, and the vehicle weights have been creeping up for safety and luxury and all sorts of other reasons, and the regulations aren't really keeping pace, and that's part of the reason we're starting to see payloads squeezed. The Ineos Grenadier is another good example of that. So let's talk about some real weights here. Now, this is Ford's curb weight for a sport version. Remember, that's 100% fuel, 2566. Here is a sport I drove, and I didn't have to do a driver change, so I just dropped by the weighbridge, which is literally on the way, and I put it onto the weighbridge, and these are the results. So let's take a look at what that looks like. The weight came out here was 2620, so that's 54 kilograms heavier. So what's going on? Well, I only had 50% fuel, so I'm going to add 25 kilos for that. Had all-terrain tyres, take 25 off, and it had the spare tyre. So really that comes out to net minus 30, and that's really only means I've got to account for 24 kilograms. The go-away weighbridge is to nearest 20. So Ford's weights are as ever accurate, and I think you can definitely trust their numbers, which is more than I can say for a lot of manufacturers. So if you're sitting there with one of your spreadsheets figuring out weights, Ford's weights are accurate, others not so much. Now let's translate that and into what it looks like against a V6, and I wanted to do that because I really wanted the front and rear axle loads. That's why I went to the weighbridge. So the V6 has a front axle limit of 1490 and it weighs 1290, and I know that because I own one and I took it stock standard to the weighbridge and I put it on. 200 kilogram margin, which is pretty good for a ute. It's one of the reasons I got it. GVM on my car is 3280 on the XLT. Again, that will vary if it's an XL or a Platinum or whatever. And it weighs 2280, and that gives me a 1000 kilogram payload. On the back, the rear axle limit's 1959, it weighs 1990, and that gives us a 969 margin. Now, coming over to the PHEV, very similar at the front, same limit, fractionally more weight, so 190 margin, but still looking pretty good. The GVM has gone up quite a bit to 3500, but it weighs more, so it now weighs 2620, so therefore we get a reduction, net reduction in payload, despite the fact the GVM is higher. The rear axle is really interesting. The limit's gone right up 2100, but so has the weight, because you can see there we've now got more than 300 extra kilograms over the back axle, which is the battery, etc., and then that margin comes right down to 780, which is significantly less. And again, the Ranger is actually one of the better utes out there for weights, particularly considering all of those weights include a tow bar. So this is not terrible, but it's just not as good as the diesel. Whether that's a problem for you is for you to decide. Okay, now the front and rear weight limit split is 57%, 43%, and 50-50 for the PHEV. And that, by the way, that's not an ideal. Now, here's how things look. So my car, stock standard, was 57-43 on the front. With all the modifications, it went to 53-47. Now that means that I can put quite a bit of load in the back and get it around about 50-50, which is pretty good for off-roading, and you certainly don't want to have a lot of weight at the back, so that's not good dynamically. The PHEV starts off at 50-50, so once you start loading it up in the same way, you're going to start to shift a lot of weight towards the back. Remember, that's before we put any load in it. This is just assuming I'd modified this car the same as that car. Now, this is not the end of the world. It's not a massive problem. What I'm saying is that the diesels are better for load carrying because they've got this more forward weight distribution and they've got higher limits to begin with. But the diesels don't have the advantages of the PHEV. There is no better here. It's just pros and cons. Now let's look at weights for towing. So max brake tow 3500. Of course, I do not recommend you actually tow 3500 with it, and that's as advice consistent for every single vehicle so rated. Max towable mass 350. GVM, we've just covered that. Payload on that. Now, if we take the GCM and we figure out what the GCM should be and we take away the GVM, we end up with a payload of no more than 460 kilograms in the vehicle, which would include occupants and everything else. So again, that's why you don't really want to tow at 3500. You run into these limits. The 2100 rear axle limit. If we put 350 kilograms of tow ball mass on the rear, then we're going to be left with around 290 kilograms before we hit the rear axle limit, which may or may not be enough for you. It will be enough if you just got a canopy and some light stuff in there, that's going to be fine, and some people in there, but if you start putting a lot more stuff in, it will be a problem. Again, this is much better than some of its competitors, but not as good as the diesels. And there's the GCM of 6580, which has been increased. Now, packaging. So tub, the tub here has changed. So if we look at, that's the tub in the diesel, and the tub in the PHEV has got a couple of changes. It pokes out a little bit here, and that's why they say it's longer at the floor, but also it's not quite as tall. And I put the total differences up here, and the reason is because the entire tub floor has been raised up a little bit by about 25 mil, so you've lost 25 mil of height, but you've gained some extra points at the bottom. So you can see there the way the tub has been raised by 25 mil, and that's the inset there, which just allows the tub length to be a little bit longer, and then there's some roller shutters. Now take a look at my V6 diesel, and you can see that there's a lot of space there, and that metal bit at the top is actually a trundle drawer. I'll show you that in a moment, but there's a lot of space there for a water tank, drawer, all sorts of things, and that's one of the disadvantages of utes. There's just quite a lot of space for this sort of stuff. Now here's the trundle drawer. See, I pulled it out, and you know, the vehicle's got space for that. I think that with the electric vehicles, you're not going to be able to do that, because here's what it looks like underneath. You just, you know, there's just not as much room because there's the battery there and whatever else. And you can see that the spare tyre, I think, might even be fractionally lower. There's just a lot more stuff in the way, which is going to limit your ability to use that space as you would in a diesel. And in fact, Ford say, do not put a service body on this vehicle, although I'm sure the aftermarket will at some point. So that was part one, and in part two we're going to be looking at on-road driving in EV and in hybrid mode. We're going to be looking at off-road driving, again in EV and in ICE mode, low range. We'll take a look at some towing impressions, and we're going to look at Pro Power on board and see what that can power things, including powering a caravan. So I hope you found this video useful. If you've got any questions, please drop them in the comments, and I will attempt to answer them either in the comments or in a future video.